Rund ums Parlament. Der Podcast des Österreichischen Parlaments.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von Rund ums Parlament, dem Podcast des Österreichischen Parlaments. Mein Name ist Tijana Rosandic. Schön, dass ihr wieder dabei seid. In den vergangenen Folgen haben wir darüber gesprochen, wie das österreichische Parlament international tätig wird. Und da gab es überraschend viel zu besprechen, von der EU-Gesetzgebung über diplomatische Tätigkeiten oder Wahlbeobachtungen in anderen Ländern bis hin zur weltweiten Stärkung der Institution Parlament als solcher. Aber die Mitglieder der hohen Häuser der Welt helfen sich auch gegenseitig, wenn es darum geht, ihre Aufgaben zu Hause besser zu erledigen. Und darüber, wie diese Art von Zusammenarbeit ganz praktisch aussieht, spreche ich heute mit meinen beiden Gästen. Und das tue ich, ihr habt es sicher schon gehört, nicht irgendwo da draußen in Wien auf einem Spaziergang, sondern seit langem einmal wieder im Studio. Aber nicht in irgendeinem Studio, wir sitzen hier im brandneuen TV-Studio der Parlamentsdirektion. Es ist wunderschön geworden. Es leuchten Studiolichter von der Decke, Kameras umringen uns. Ein sehr schönes, repräsentatives Bild des Parlaments begleitet uns im Hintergrund. Also wir haben heute die Freude, in einem sehr professionell ausgestatteten TV-Studio aufzunehmen. Und ihr fragt euch, warum Studio? Weil einer unserer Gäste ist nicht hier in Wien, sondern in Podgorica, der Hauptstadt Montenegros. Also ganz passend zu unserem Thema internationale Kooperationen. Und es gibt noch eine Besonderheit in dieser Folge. Wir werden nämlich heute Englisch miteinander sprechen. And this is why I say hello Montenegro, hello Tijana Rosandic. Welcome to our podcast.
Hello Wien, thank you for inviting me.
I have to say that it has the flavor of a Eurovision contest, right?
I just wanted to say that.
That's very funny in this setting.
Yeah.
May I introduce you, Ms. Rosandic? Mrs. Rosandic, you are, amongst other things, Foreign Affairs Advisor in the Secretary General's Office of the Parliament of Montenegro and National Correspondent for the European Parliament. But apart from that, you're also the Montenegrin project leader of the Inter Pares project. We're going to talk about that a lot more today. Inter Pares is funded by the European Union, and it is, that's what its title says, a global project to strengthen the capacity of parliaments. And in the context of this program, you work together with Katharina Stourzh, my second guest today. Hello to you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here together with you and Tijana, with you online. Great that we have this talk today.
Pleasure to have you in the studio, here live with me. How do you think the TV studio turns out?
I'm quite impressed, actually, and it's the first time for me to be here. So it's kind of a privilege.
Right. Mrs. Stourzh, you are head of the Department of Parliamentary Cooperation in the Austrian Parliament. Among other things, you are responsible for the development and implementation of parliamentary cooperation. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's the task of our division, together with the whole administration, with the MPs, and of course our partners.
Mm-hmm. On its website, to talk a little more about the Inter Pares, like we introduced before, the purpose of Inter Pares reads like this. And, dear listeners, it will get easier to understand everything after that sentence. Be prepared. This is a political slang, and we are going to explain that afterwards. Okay? So, it reads like this. To strengthen the capacity of parliaments in partner countries by enhancing their legislative oversight, representative, budgetary and administrative functions. So, Ms. Stourzh,
Yes.
This is your turn to explain us what that means in real life. Please give us a few examples.
Yes, of course. Well, actually, it's very easy, and actually, on a very practical point of view, it's all about, exchanging experiences of best practices. For instance, how do MPs exercise their oversight function in the parliaments? What kind of tools within the rules of procedure do they have? What rights of questions, the so-called interpellation rights, for instance, how is this organized in the different parliaments? And for instance, we talked about it, how it is organized in the Montenegrin Parliament, how is it organized in the Austrian Parliament, and what can we learn from each other, and how was the development also made within the rules of procedures, but also, for instance, how is the EU coordination and the process of EU accession? How was it organized in the Austrian Parliament? And are there best practices for the Montenegrin Parliament, for instance, to learn about that? But also it's about the question of e-law, about human resources, the whole question, as you were saying, the whole structure of the parliament and the parliamentary administration, how can it be strengthened? And then we have actually two tracks, We have, of course, the work on the administrative level, but also on the political level. And in all these projects we will talk about, also, of course, MPs are very often involved. But it's true that the focus is a lot also in the projects on the administrative element, I would say.
Okay, so now we heard about a lot of examples, but we kept to be on the surface. So there is no real practical story that blows up in front of my mind. Is there one thing we can pick out? For example, how do you enhance the oversight functions of the Montenegrin Parliament practically? And we can pick it out and tell a story about this one.
Of course, there are two examples. For instance, the two colleagues from our budget office went to Montenegro, although we also had an online meeting still due to COVID. And it was kind of a workshop. And maybe Tijana can also then come in here and explain a little bit from her side. So we had a workshop. What's the work of the budget office? Why was it implemented? Why is it important to have such a budget office to serve the MPs to do their financial oversight? On the other hand, we had a meeting and also workshop and seminar, for instance, on the questions how MPs at the beginning of a new legislative period are kind of introduced to the whole parliamentary daily work and daily business. What would they need? What are all the services offered by the parliamentary administration? And here, for instance, I think it was very interesting, Tijana, if you remember, we had these workshops, and when our colleagues from the Austrian parliamentary administration came back, they really kind of learned a lot also from your parliament. And then they tried now to implement what they learned and what they see how you do it, to implement that in our kind of onboarding project and service center project for our start of the legislative period. So there are many examples, I think, and actually very concrete work is done with the goal to support and to give best practices, in this case for the Montenegrin Parliament. We will have a project, hopefully with other countries, where we also work very, how would you say, down to earth and on the ground to really facilitate for the colleagues in administration what they need. And then we also bring back a lot of experience for our work here.
Well, I think that's really a good point for Mrs. Rosandic to jump in. How does the Inter Pares project form itself from your point of view?
This was, I will pick up on the Mrs. Stourz's example of the Austrian Parliamentary Budgetary Office, which is a great example of how this project was very valuable for us and how it actually worked in practice. We expressed our interest in strengthening several mechanisms that we use for oversight, for control of the government. And that was one component, and the other was harmonization, so alignment of national laws with the whole vast body of EU laws. And within this strengthening component, we had our priorities, but also during the conversation while we were still preparing the project, the Austrian Parliament, as other partners as well, expressed also, what they're good at. And one of the things that we picked up on was also the Parliamentary Budgetary Office. And that is one of the values of this project. It was very flexible, and we could add things as we went along. So as we discussed also it would appear that we could benefit from examples of other countries that could be useful for us in, of course, the area of the exchange of experience. So on a concrete level, this is always about the procedures. So we have our own procedures, but if we see, for example, in your budgetary office that something works better, then we try to not implement exactly the same, but tailor something that you have, something that is efficient, and then bring it back to our parliament.
Here, a very human question comes up in my mind. How hard is it to implement new ways for people who work in the parliament, for example, for 30 years, and now there is EU, and now there is cooperations, and how do they react to that?
Depends. For us, for administration, it's smoother. It's a smoother transition, I think, and especially if you have people with enthusiasm to push things forward. But it does not only depend on the administration. You have to have the right type of setting, and you have to have also political decision to move forward something. So there are a lot of factors, external also that depends on how quick the change can be implemented. But I think the will is the will to do something is the first and, I guess, the most important step.
That's true. It sounds like it's civil servants who are talking to each other in this project, not parliamentarians. Is that true?
Yes and no. Today we're speaking from the point of civil servants. So I guess the focus will be on our work more than on the work of the parliamentarians. But the project was designed to cater both the needs of the parliamentarians and the work of civil servants. Of course, the activities that were set up for parliamentarians were different. It was mostly dialogue and talks and exchange of experience. And then on our side, there was also that exchange of experience, but also certain points, to some extent, there was capacity building, especially for harmonization. So in the end, I have to, admit to say that of all the activities that we planned, we conducted everything that was planned for the service, for the administration. But then some components, some activities that were devised for parliamentarians were not conducted till the end because of the very active and very vibrant political scene in Montenegro. So we had major political events. Two governments changed, speakers changed. We had early parliamentary elections, so all that affected not just regular parliamentary processes, but also it in a way hindered our implementation of the activities of the project.
How is the saying, you go with the flow, right?
Yes. And that's why the project was great. We could adapt as we went. So it was really, and also it was not effort on our side and Inter Pares that coordinated everything, but also on the colleagues, Austrian and other 6 countries, 6 parliaments, that actually were very full of understanding and were willing to accommodate the changes that need to be done in order to proceed with the project. So thank you.
Of course, no, but actually what you said, I think that's interesting here in that project. You have the flexibility in many ways because you can adapt very quickly. You can add activities which hadn't been planned. You can, you can make many changes. And it's true, very often in these projects, the focus is on the administrative level. But actually, also in the other project, there are always elements included where you try to involve MPs. But of course, as there's also the saying, politicians come and go and the administration stays. So to also have a sustainability in the projects and in the capacity building activities, it is important, of course, that there is a good exchange between the administrations. And I think we will talk about it later also. And this is really a huge added value, I would say, for all participants in the projects, be it the beneficiary parliament, Parliament or the other partners. And another, I think, advantage of the Inter-Pares project and other projects is that we work together, as Tijana had mentioned, with other countries. So it was not only Austria taking part in that project. We had colleagues from Greece, from France, from the Czech Republic, Italy. So that it was a very good, I would say, combination and very, very intensive and lively exchange for all of us.
So the conclusion that cooperation between parliaments is more a task of the administrative staff of parliaments is valid?
Well, I think there are different, I would say, maybe tracks, within parliamentary cooperation or even in the parliamentary diplomacy. But today, we're really focusing on the cooperation on the administrative level, I would say. But of course, I think it's important, as Tijana also was mentioning, that there is the political support. And this is needed, of course, in all the parliaments to do that. It's needed in the Austrian Parliament, and it's there, and it's needed in the parliaments we're working with.
The little insights you gave me now about the project, I think they are reason enough to be part of that. But Mrs. Rosandic, may I ask you again, why does the Montenegrin Parliament take part in Inter-Pares?
Well, Montenegro is a candidate country for accession to the European Union. And currently we're in the process of negotiating. And it's quite a journey for us. And this process involves, rigorous negotiations and preparations to align our country with EU standards, basically. And to aid this preparation, EU funds certain projects to come into play these goals that we have. And one of those projects was Inter-Pares. What made it special, as I said, for us is this kind of flexibility that we got, which is, well, let's be honest, not always the case with the European-funded projects, which also has, strict requirements and controls, still has, its reasoning. But from the beneficiary side, from beneficiary point of view, this was a unique opportunity for us. And also what was the biggest, let's say, benefit that we got is that we had this, unique opportunity for the Parliament to directly engage with counterparts from 7 EU countries. So it was Austria, the Czech Republic, Croatia, Greece, France, Hungary, and Italy. And we established this partnership in 2021, and within the 2 years, there were a lot of doors opened for us to learn from EU member state parliaments, to share the ideas, share the experience, and in the end, to strengthen our parliamentary practices.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. And now the next question pops up immediately because Austria is in such a different place. Why does the Austrian Parliament participate? Mrs. Stourzh.
Well, I think that's a quite easy and clear answer. As you know, the Western Balkan region is a focus region of Austria's foreign policy and also of the activities of the Austrian Parliament abroad. So when this proposal came up, it was quite clear that the Austrian Parliament would participate in that project. And we are very glad that we did so. It was our first participation within Inter-Pares. So we made very good experiences, and I think, Tijana, it was a very good cooperation actually with you and all the other already mentioned countries. And then, as I said, it's important, it's a flexible instrument, and it's really good to have a small group of EU countries working together with a beneficiary country. And for all of us, it really was good to have this comparative view. And this is also in other projects, but I think in Inter-Pares, and especially now with the case of Montenegro, it was shown very well. And all of us really could profit from that.
I think so. And also maybe in between the EU countries, which are very different themselves, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And to see the different ways how the parliamentary system is working, also the daily business is working. So for all of us, there's always great benefit, I would say.
Mrs. Stourzh, Inter-Pares, as beautiful as it is with its Latin translated name Amongst Equals, is not the only cooperation of the Montenegrin or the Austrian parliaments they are part of. Can you name a few more for the Austrian Parliament?
Yes, of course. As I already said, we try to be very active in the countries of the Western Balkan region. On the one hand, have a lot of bilateral activities. We have implemented and are still implementing the model of the democracy workshop of the Austrian Parliament together with other parliaments. We just are on the way to do it in Albania, and the first step was done in June very successfully. We're working together with North Macedonia on the same topic. We had a twinning project together with the Hungarian colleagues and colleagues from Croatia in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 2019 to 2021. Which was also for the Austrian Parliament a great experience, I would say, where also the focus was on the administration, but also MPs and members of the different committees, of course, were involved. So there are many other activities. And maybe I really would like to mention one project, because there's also a link to Tijana. That was a great coincidence, I would say, and synergy also, because the Austrian Parliament had established a fellowship program where the Austrian Parliament invites colleagues from the 6 Western Balkan countries to come to Austria to work with us together for 6 weeks in different fields. And we had the pleasure also to welcome Tijana as one of our fellows from the Montenegrin Parliament. So you just stayed there, Tijana, 6 weeks last spring. And so I wanted to mention the project as such, because this is really a project from Austria. And actually the Austrian Parliament here is a front runner, because no other EU parliament for now has such a program. Of course, the European Parliament has a fellowship program. And so we hope also maybe that other EU parliaments would follow. So it was a great experience to have you, Tijana, with the other colleagues here. So maybe I hand over to you.
Yes, absolutely. It was wonderful. And I too hope that other parliaments will establish this practice. I know that you have it with not just Western Balkans, you have it with Bundestag, German Bundestag. So it's a good practice, not of this exchange of experience. And it is a privilege to go to another environment, which is similar, but very different, and to work with your colleagues, with professional teams. So it is always, you have this, let's say, always introduction into a fellowship, and then you have introduction to, in my case, Austrian Parliament. So general things, daily operations, so legislative process, etc. But then the fellowship is tailored to what I do back home in Montenegro. And the best part of this is that you get hands-on experience. So you actually work on a daily basis with people from other country. And it's not just about observation. You're so not acquiring insights, but you actually learn on the job. And you don't don't come empty-handed back home. So you bring back a wealth of practices that can be, as I said, adapted and implemented in our parliament. We all have functioning parliaments. I mean, things that make our work more effective for MPs, for the parliament.
That sounds so amazing.
It is, it's when you talk about it in this, general terms, it's very abstract. But when you go down into details, then it's really valuable.
It really sounds like the best way to learn, because hands-on is the only way you really take something with you. And working with your colleagues or new colleagues in the same field for 6 weeks is something really valuable you can bring home. That's such a good program.
And also, being in Vienna was also amazing.
And also for the Austrian Parliament, I think it's really a great experience because, of course, we're working together. So the whole parliamentary administration, because, of course, sometimes we have colleagues who are specialized in the budget process or HR, communication, whatever. So, of course, we want and have to include all the colleagues. And after these 6 weeks, after that experience, actually, they really were also quite happy and astonished that it was such a positive experience. And also, they still are in contact with us, with the fellows, and because we have kind of a mentor system, in every division our fellows are assigned to. There is a person really, mentoring a little bit the colleagues. So that's also really good to build up a network, which we also try to, So the network of the fellows together with our colleagues from the administration.
And if I may add, another thing that was wonderful in this experience is that I was very lucky to be there at the same time with two other fellows, one from Albania, one from Serbia, that also work in the international department or EU. And we were inspired by our experience in Austrian Parliament, and we were thinking how, funny it is that we come to Austria. We had Austrian Parliament bring us together, and then we realized it's a pity that we don't have this among ourselves, without in the Western Balkans, without other countries. So we were actually inspired by this fellowship program, and we had this idea that might come into fruition one day, hopefully, that we replicate what Austrian Parliament has and replicate it in the Western Balkan countries across our 6 countries. And we drafted a project concept in terms of reference for this, let's call it joint regional fellowship. And hopefully, it will have similar goals. It's always about the exchange and improvement and strengthening. So, and also promoting regional stability and progress, which is also important, especially in the light of all our, aspirations for the accession to the EU. So, we'll see what will come about from that. But that was, one other result of our Austrian fellowship.
Which is great, actually. I mean, we really were impressed and kind of honored that you took that idea and developed it further. And you were also mentioning, I think, that it was quite important for us also to see, and in general, because we're also talking a lot always, regional cooperation is so important. And I think this really is an example of lived regional cooperation, which is great, and another kind of result of that project and the program, which we are conducting with a partner in the region, in Belgrade, the European Fund for the Balkans. So we already achieved some results and further projects.
Yeah, and great. That's what I love about international cooperation. You start with one thing, and then you end up with 10 different results that you never expected.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is the sense of it also, I would say. And to have study visits and all the other kind of activities, then also with other countries, and other countries also get inspired, I think, also.
This feels so much for what I think the EU should be. I'm really, I got a fan through this talk of this project. I just really appreciate it. Good. I have one more question to the both of you. I think Mrs. Stourzh should start with her answer. In the past episodes, we talked a lot about parliamentary diplomacy, and there is some overlap with the type of cooperations we were just talking about, it seems to me. Is that true?
Partly, I would say, yes, of course, because as we were mentioning already, there is a kind of combination of activities where we involve the MPs. This is also part of parliamentary diplomacy, I would say, talking with the colleagues on the committee level or within also, for instance, the bilateral parliamentary groups, which we also try to involve when we have study visits or, for instance, when we have also within the framework of the fellowship program, we will have a so-called joint seminar when we bring together 2 generations. And then, of course, we want the group to meet our MPs, and those MPs especially dealing either with EU affairs or being the chairs of the respective parliamentary groups. So there are synergies and overlaps, which is, I think, very important and very good. And then, for instance, we had 2 years ago a TAIEX project in North Macedonia. So that was also driven by our chair of the Standing EU Subcommittee of the National Council and the French counterpart. And they finally were there on the spot to talk with their colleagues of parliament. And we had a combined, I would say, program for the MPs and for the administration. Mm-hmm. So very often it's the case, I would say.
Do you have the same experience?
Yes, actually. It's always both, diplomacy, parliamentary diplomacy and parliamentary cooperation are intertwined because they always serve the common goals of the parliament. And that is, to present national interest and profound international cooperation with other parliaments. You need the diplomacy to lead the way, I guess. And then I feel that parliamentary cooperation, from my point of view, because I work there, provides sort of a foundation for parliamentary diplomacy then to build upon it. In the end, it comes down, successful in both parliamentary diplomacy and cooperation, it always comes down to, let's say, collaborative efforts of both sides, always with the work of parliamentarians and staff that are providing, the expertise, I guess.
Well, we're coming to an end. And last but not least, imagine there's a magic fairy, me. And you could wish 3 wishes, 3 things from the development of the European parliaments. What would they be? Mrs. Stourzh, you start. Wish.
Well, as regards interparliamentary cooperation and coordination and collaboration, I think it's even more joint efforts, is building up the networks and learning from each other. And I think there are already many initiatives and elements, and also from the purview of the European Parliament, there's also had been built up the so-called Democracy Support Network, which I think is a very useful tool for that. So I'm very confident and very much looking forward to further efforts and even more joint initiatives, as also had been said by Tijana.
Yeah, I would also say, stronger collaboration, information sharing. One big thing that I took from Austrian Parliament, although we are very also good in that realm, is, enhanced transparency and openness. Our parliament is very open and very transparent. But, for example, Austrian Parliament would be a great example of, where should all parliaments go? So it's not just about ensuring that citizens have easy access to information and legislative processes, but it's also, the things that promote accountability and trust in democratic institutions. And I think that all of us lack that. And one more thing that I think that all parliaments should strive to is to increase digitalization and innovation.
Very good. As we sit in this parliament that is really approachable and newly renovated and very, very beautiful, can you also visit the parliament in Montenegro? Is it open for the public?
Yes, actually, it's very open. It's actually the most transparent and open parliament in the region, and I have to say, including Croatia and Slovenia. There's some measurements that are taken every year, and several years in a row, Montenegro is top ranking parliament. But there's a lot of things to do. For example, we had Citizens' Assembly in Montenegro. It was something like the Conference on the Future of Europe, but on a much smaller scale here. And it was about corruption. As much as we think that we are open and transparent, there's still a lot of things to be done. Yes, we are open. We don't have that, let's say, the technology that your parliament has. And we don't have the features that your parliament has, which are really wonderful. Really, the whole building after renovation is impressive. And the whole idea behind it, behind the openness of your parliament, is really impressive. But we are striving for that. So someday, hopefully, yes.
Great. Thank you for the insights also, like in your parliament and in your daily work and in your experiences in the fellowship. Mrs. Rosandic, 3 questions to you. Spring or autumn?
If I have to choose, I think I would go for autumn. The best seasons. Why not winter and summer?
Yeah, that's way too easy. Life is not like that.
Yeah. But I would think I would go for autumn, maybe because it's approaching and we have very, very hot summers in Montenegro. So autumn brings relief.
Compromise or best solution?
I would say agreement. And then you never know what the best solution at one point might not be best at a certain point in future. So I would say agreement.
Okay. And where does democracy start for you?
With people, absolutely. With people, free will and inclusion, openness, absolutely with people.
Thank you. Mrs. Stourzh, spring or autumn?
Well, if I had to choose, it's difficult because I like all the seasons. All of them have their advantages. But if you really want to have a choice now, I would say spring.
Great. Compromise or best solution?
I guess very often the compromise is the best solution. And compromise in the best sense, it is very often, it should be the best solution.
And where does democracy start for you?
Well, I would say working in the Parliament, I would say in the Parliament, but as Tijana also was saying, with people, especially with the youth, I would say. That's important for me.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosandic. And also thank you in the studio, Mrs. Stourzh, for giving us such a rich experience of your cooperations. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. And bye-bye, Tijana. Bye,
Thank you for inviting me to share our experience and for this wonderful talk.
Bye. Und jetzt, wo wir uns von unseren Gästen verabschiedet haben, bedanke ich mich auch bei euch fürs Zuhören. Vielen Dank, dass ihr dabei geblieben seid. Ich finde, es war sehr, sehr spannend. Und ich hoffe sehr, dass ihr auch das nächste Mal wieder mit dabei seid. Dann wenden wir uns nämlich einem neuen Thema zu. Wieder ein Thema, das uns alle betrifft, wie so oft, nämlich den Gesetzen. Wo, wie und durch wen entsteht überhaupt so ein Gesetz? Das wollen wir uns gemeinsam mit sehr interessanten Gästen näher anschauen. Und ich bin mir sicher, das wird spannend und lehrreich. Also am besten, ihr hört das nächste Mal wieder rein. Und wenn euch diese Folge gefallen hat, dann empfehlt sie gerne weiter und abonniert vielleicht auch gleich unseren Podcast. Dann verpasst ihr nämlich garantiert keine Folge mehr. Abonnieren könnt ihr überall, wo es Podcasts gibt, ob auf Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Deezer oder Amazon Music. Jede Menge Informationen und Angebote rund um das österreichische Parlament und zu unserer Demokratie findet ihr auf unserer Website www.parlament.gv.at und natürlich den Social-Media-Kanälen des Parlaments. Falls ihr Fragen, Kritik oder Anregungen zum Podcast habt, dann schreibt uns gerne eine E-Mail an podcast@parlament.gv.at. Also, ich freue mich schon auf die nächste Folge mit euch. In diesem Sinne sage ich vielen, vielen Dank fürs Zuhören. Mein Name ist Tijana Rosandic. Wir hören uns.